Well, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, wherever you happen to find yourself. I'm so pleased to welcome you to another webinar with the Public and International Service Advisor Network. My name is Carmen Mazzara, and I serve as Executive Director of APSIA. We are the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs, and so proud to be the home of the PISA network, where we really hope to make it easy for you all as advisors to bring the many different fantastic opportunities within public and international service to your students throughout the year. In particular, today, I'm excited to have two great speakers here to talk to you about four great programs, which really offer your students a wonderful opportunity to link the training from a graduate school program with very fulfilling careers in public service. This session is being recorded and will be available on the APSIA YouTube page afterwards. As we go through the session, if you have any questions for our speakers, please feel free to put those in the chat. If you have any technical issues, please feel free to send me a direct message or hit up my amazing colleague, Brittany Chor, who's arranged this wonderful session for you all, and we will do our best to take care of you. And so with that, I am very pleased to turn the floor over to my colleagues. And Patricia, I think you will kick us off.
I believe I will. Hi, everybody. My name is Patricia Scroggs, and I'm the Director of Diplomatic Fellowships at Howard University. The Diplomatic Fellowships are a group of fellowships that are supported by U.S. government agencies. This is the Department of State, USAID, and the Department of Agriculture that basically pay for graduate school professional development and lead to a career in the foreign service. So what's different about these fellowships is if you get the fellowship, you get the job at the end, and in between is support of well over $100,000 for individuals interested in the foreign service itself. Now, the one thing that is really important in here is that the individuals are interested in the foreign service. Our foreign services work all around the world at our embassies to promote democracy and human dignity, fight trafficking in persons, work on international environmental cooperation, work on international trade, work on international development. Pretty much any issue we have in the United States, we have to deal with when we go overseas. So for people who are interested, this is a really wonderful opportunity. Also, our fellowships are based on trying to get more people to join the Foreign Service. So for us, we welcome the application of members of minority groups who are historically underrepresented in the Foreign Service, women, and those with financial need. This does not mean that we are not open to anybody else. We are. But these things are really important to us. We would very much like to have different voices at the table. That includes first generation Americans, naturalized American citizens, first generation Americans, people that have a wide variety of geographic diversity. So again, if you think about us, think about trying to get new people into the Foreign Service. So anyway, I'm glad to answer questions about the Foreign Service. Most of our fellowships have a 5-year service obligation, which is generally 2 tours overseas and maybe a year of training before. And so again, it's a wonderful way to find out whether or not this is something that interests you as a long-term career. Okay, so let's talk about the fellowships. I'm going to start with the Rangel. But our other fellowships are very similar, so I'll spend a little bit more time on this and I'll go through the others more quickly. So the Charles B. Rangel International Affairs Fellowship, again, is for individuals who are interested in joining the State Department Foreign Service. We provide up to $106,000 over 2 years for tuition, fees, living expenses, and summer internships. In addition, so $106,000 sounds pretty good, right? Except that even with that, graduate school is often more expensive than that. And so we have over 50 universities across the country that provide additional funding for our fellows, often paying whatever we do not pay. So our hope is that your students and your alumni can go to the graduate program that they really want to go to and come out without having any additional debt. So this is what we're trying to do with the fellowship. Let's see, once they're selected, they have an orientation, a week of orientation to learn about the fellowships. For Rangel, they do a 10-week internship on Capitol Hill the first summer. So if they're applying this September, they're going to know whether or not they have it before the holidays this year. I think it's the first week of December they'll know. Then they start applying for graduate schools, and then we see them for the first time the third week of May in 2024, because they're going to be doing orientation then. Apologize for the ringing phone in the background. And then they'll go on, then they'll do their congressional internship. They then start their graduate program. It's a 2-year graduate program in fall, a 2-year graduate program in an area of relevance to the Foreign Service. It has to be full-time. It has to be at a U.S. institution, just so you know. Okay, so they start that the summer between the first and second year. They go overseas and they work at a U.S. embassy. Then when they graduate, they join the Foreign Service. So as I said, if they get the fellowship, they get the job at the end. They get mentoring actually from 2 Foreign Service officers to make sure that they're not only part of this really wonderful supportive cohort that they're joining with, but also that they have people in the Foreign Service that are spending time and helping to orient them to the Foreign Service. Again, they get employment afterwards, but they do have a 5-year service obligation, and there are partner schools that provide additional funding. Okay, so the Thomas Pickering program is basically the same thing, except that the domestic internship is different. So the domestic internship for State Department Pickering Fellows is at the main State Department building rather than on Capitol Hill. And because it needs a security clearance, it's the second summer. Other than that, these 2 programs are exactly the same in terms of how much we give you, what universities you can go to, what types of programs you can study, things like that. And again, if you're going to apply to one, apply to both. We administer both out of Howard University, and we've made the applications identical so that it's really easy to apply to both. Each program will pick 90 finalists this year, and out of that, they'll pick 45 fellows. So if you apply to both, we'll be picking 180 finalists, and 90 will get the fellowships. So that makes a lot of sense if this is something that interests your fellows. Let's see. Okay, so let's just talk about some of the timelines. So we go back and forth as to who goes first. We are sibling programs, so we have to take turns, as all good siblings must. So Pickering program is going to go first this year. Their application deadline is September 21st. They will tell people if they're finalists on November 2nd, which is a pretty fast turnaround. They're going to be interviewing November 13th through 16th, and November 17th, before Thanksgiving, they will know whether or not they have the fellowship. So they don't even have to have started applying for graduate school. The only thing we ask is, where are you planning to apply? And what we're looking for in that question is a 2-year program at a U.S. university in an area of relevance. Okay, Rangel is about a week behind, so September 28th is the deadline. So November 8th, you'll know whether or not you're a finalist. December 6th and 7th are interviews, and then you'll know by December 8th whether or not you are a fellow. Again, each one will give out 45 fellowships. Our eligibility criteria: everyone has to be a U.S. citizen because you are going into U.S. government employment. You have to have a GPA, a cumulative GPA of at least 3.2, and they have to be intending to start graduate school in fall 2024 for a 2-year program in a relevant discipline in a U.S. university. They have to have received their undergraduate degree by spring of 2024 or be a college graduate. So what's a relevant discipline? So there's a wide range. We don't have a list of them because, again, they always change the titles of the programs, but generally it's international relations, international affairs, security studies, a master's in public administration, a master's in business administration, a master's in area studies like, Middle Eastern studies, journalism, economics. So there's a wide range of degrees that would be relevant. Sports medicine would not be relevant, if that helps you. Also, for this program, at this point, we aren't doing Masters of Public Health. If that's something of interest, that's going to come later for the Payne program. So basically, who are we looking for in this program? Oops. Again, anyone can apply, mostly the seniors, right? Because they have to start graduate school the following year, and people that have already graduated are basically who we are looking for. But within that, we encourage the application of members of minority groups historically underrepresented in the Foreign Service, women, and those with financial need. We also value individuals with a commitment to public service, individuals from diverse areas within the United States, individuals interested in management, economics, and consular affairs. We get a lot of people who, again, we are also interested in people that are interested in political and public diplomacy, but we get a lot of them. So if you happen to know somebody who does management and it's like, I like to join the Foreign Service, but I'm not sure I have the right background for it. Yes, they do. We really need people that we have huge embassies to manage. Consular are the people that support American citizens when they have issues overseas that need to be handled, as well as facilitating legitimate travel to the United States. We look for individuals who have demonstrated resourcefulness and resiliency. When they have done studies of the Foreign Service, that is the most important feature of a Foreign Service, of a successful Foreign Service officer. And so students who come from backgrounds, maybe they're first-generation college students, or students that have simply had to work maybe when they've gone to school because of financial need, or started a community college and moved somewhere. These can often be indications of having resilience and resourcefulness. So those are always of interest to us. Certainly individuals with interest in foreign languages and cultures. You do not have to have gone overseas. You don't have to have done study abroad. Very often you can pursue your interests in the United States. Maybe it's through your volunteer work. Maybe you're from a multicultural family. So don't think you only have to have international experience outside of the United States. We also look for people who have strong leadership skills. Again, first-generation college students. And more than anything, individuals who want to represent the United States as diplomats. Okay, and then what can you do to help them as advisors? Each of our fellowships has an advisors tab under resources. Please look at that. So we tell you who's come from your school before and has been through the program. How do you find out, where to get the promotional material? How do you get a presentation? All of that stuff is up in the advisors. So feel free to use it. We also have frequently asked questions, application tips. We do a lot of social media outreach. Please share the information broadly. It's always helpful to schedule pitch sessions with groups that support underrepresented and/or first-generation students. Certainly you can identify a Rangel or Pickering alumnus from your institution. If you can't figure out our system for any reason, just email us. My email is pscroggs@howard.edu. We are happy to help you find somebody who will speak, one of our fellows. Also, a great idea is to reach out to those who have done or may do other types of fellowships that are internationally related. Gilman scholars, excellent, because of course we know they have the financial need. Boren, critical language scholarships, Fulbright, and anything else that's more internationally focused. And then contact us for information. We are always willing to support you. We can almost always find someone to speak if you have a group of students or a group of faculty and staff who want to assist. And with this, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Nye, to talk about another wonderful opportunity, the Payne Graduate Fellowship.
Hey, hi, hello, everyone. My name is Najir Alim Jules, and I'm the Deputy Director for the Donald M. Payne International Development Fellowship Program, which is very similar to the two State Department fellowships that Patricia just covered for you all. So much, in fact, one could almost say that Payne is like a cousin to Rangel more especially. So with that, very similar to the Rangel and the Pickering, the Payne Graduate Fellowship awards up to $104,000 over 2 years, and that's for tuition and fees, living expenses, and summer internships. With that, that breaks out to be around $24,000 per year for the tuition and fees. Please note, just like Rangel and Pickering, Payne also has a graduate program list where there's additional graduate schools and programs that have agreed to offer supplemental funding to help support the cost of the overall tuition for our fellows through that experience. The program also provides an $18,000 per year for a living stipend. That's a personal stipend that's delivered directly to the fellow. And then we provide up to $10,000 per year for summer internships. And that $10,000 includes housing and transportation. Very similar to the Rangel program, the Payne Fellows do a 10-week internship, a congressional internship on Capitol Hill, the summer before entering their first year of graduate school. And then following that, they'll do a 10-week overseas internship overseas at a USAID mission in between the first and second year of graduate school. Where the Payne Fellowship differs from the other two Department of State fellowships, the Rangel and the Pickering, specifically is that USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, is focusing on development and need-based aid to its partners abroad, et cetera. So think of the hunger initiatives and programs, the HIV initiatives and programs that are done overseas, where government U.S. assistance is given to these foreign entities and those programs that roll out there. That is the type of development work that a lot of our fellows will be doing in the USAID Foreign Service. So where Pickering and Rangel goes into the Department of State's Foreign Service, again, USAID has its own foreign service where the Payne Fellows will go in and become development foreign service officers. With that, there is a numerous plethora of interests in which Payne Fellows could study and cover. Again, we do cover such fields that are relevant to international affairs and relations, the MPAs, the MPPs, et cetera. But we also do more niche types of focus programs for our graduate studies, such as public health, as Patricia had mentioned, social work, crisis stabilization, and governance. We also have a strong need for those who are interested in management, as they'll go into the executive officer track of USAID. Contracting officers, those who are interested in substantial back-end research and working on different contracts, et cetera, between different agencies and delivering such aid. There's a path and need for you there as well. So when the fellows are awarded the Payne Fellowship, one of the things that we do is to ensure that their graduate programs, because they apply to graduate school again separately from our fellowships, are applicable to the overall Payne Fellowship in regards to the development background needs. So we have backstop coordinators, and there's everything from, again, humanitarianism to crisis stabilization, to governance, to public health, et cetera, who will confirm that the awarded fellows in their graduate institutions correlate to their career track. Again, once you get our fellowship, you also get the job, according to passing certain things such as the security clearances, et cetera. But it is also a very wonderful opportunity. I believe we have another slide after this, Patricia.
We do.
Yes, perfect. So really quick to cover our selection process and timeline. Again, it's very, very similar to Rangel and Pickering. We do assess the academic background. We require a personal statement, as well as a statement of financial need and 2 letters of recommendation. And also would really like to see the applicants highlight their community service and their leadership types of experience as well. To be eligible for the Payne Fellowship, it does require U.S. citizenship by the application deadline. naturalized citizenship by that time as well, a cumulative 3.2 GPA on a 4.0 scale, and then again, planning to enroll in a graduate program for the 2024 cycle for fall 2024. So our schedule for the Payne Fellowship is slightly different than Rangel and Pickering, where their awardees will be notified within this calendar year. Ours, we finish our selection process in January. So the application for the Payne program closes after Rangel and Pickering, so they have a little bit more time to apply. October 26th is the application deadline for the 2024 cycle. On December 7th, we will select the 60 finalists, and then we will conduct our virtual selection final round interviews between January 16th and the 19th in 2024. Following that, the notifications and decisions are sent out to 30 fellowship to 30 fellows by January 22nd there. Payne's process is a tad bit different, mainly because within the Payne process, there is a group exercise component there. So we do advise that you please visit our website, click the advisor resources to get additional information on how to prepare your potential and prospective candidates for not only the application, but also the final round selections process there. Okay. I think, Patricia, we have one more slide.
Yeah, I was going to talk again about a newish program, which is called the Foreign Agricultural Service International Agricultural Fellowship. Until this week, it was called the Foreign Agricultural Service Diversity Fellowship Program. It has changed, but it's the same program. This is the second year that the program has existed, and it looks for people interested in the Foreign Agricultural Service, which is USDA's foreign service. So like USAID and State Department, they work overseas. They work in over 100 posts, and their job is to help promote agricultural exports from the United States to other countries. So they will work with doing, events. They will work with trade policy to try to open up markets from different type of trade barriers. Theirs is really a wonderful job. Again, it's economic focused, but they're the ones that, go out and have to promote things like wine and cheese and beef, So again, they have a great job, and it's really, really interesting. This is very similar, except that for them, you go into the Foreign Agricultural Service when you complete it. Again, $106,000. There are partner schools for it. The difference, though, is that for this one, there's a more limited number of programs. You have to do a 2-year master's degree in either agribusiness or agricultural economics, because this is really what you're going to be working on. But you get mentoring from the Foreign Agricultural Service. Again, we had our first group this summer, and they had so much support from the Foreign Agricultural Service. It was great to see them. They spent the first summer working at the headquarters. Next summer, they'll be going overseas to work at a U.S. embassy, and in fall, they'll start their program. So we're going to be looking at this one too. You can have any background, so you don't have to be an agricultural major or an economics major, but you have to be interested in working in agricultural economics for your master's degree. Oh, and just very briefly, we also have an undergraduate program, which is called the Rangel International Affairs Summer Enrichment Program. So this is for your sophomores, juniors, and seniors, as long as they are still a full-time student when they apply. And the application will close this year in February of 2024. So this is 6 weeks, all expenses paid in Washington, D.C., learning about foreign affairs careers. So, I mean, how often in your life do you get 6 weeks just to think about, what do I want to do for the rest of my life? And we'll show them different options. We'll go see government agencies, non-governmental agencies, private sector, Congress, think tanks, so they can see, what it is that they might do, and also what kind of academic background those organizations want, so that when they're looking for doing graduate school, they have a better idea of what they're going for. We do a lot of professional career professional development. So we'll work on things like interview skills. We'll work on public speaking, briefing skills, mocktail parties. How do you walk into a room full of people you don't know and start talking? None of us likes to do it, right? But it's often a very important part of being a professional. So we do all of that with them, and it's a really fun summer. We provide funding for room, board, tuition, transportation, and we also give them a stipend of $3,300 to replace income that they may have gotten through working. For this one, you have to be a U.S. citizen, have to have a GPA of at least 3.2, and your applicants must be full-time undergraduate students with at least sophomore status. I have some tips for preparing for competitive applications, but I think I'll wait and let you all ask some questions first.
Well, thank you both for that great unpacking of these wonderful programs. And I see lots of great questions in the chat, so I appreciate the chance to jump in. The first question I got was from someone who supports students studying environmental science. You two both talked about the things you would need to study going forward in graduate school, but can you talk a little bit about whether it matters what the students are doing as undergraduates?
It does not matter. They can have any background, but that is a wonderful background for either one. So for USAID, they could actually go ahead and get a master's in environmental science. Yes. Whereas State Department, they probably would not, because they've already bring in that information. So it would probably be, you do a master's in public policy with an emphasis on environmental science, or a master's in international relations or something else, but with they could still keep the focus, but in the scientific would be of less interest to us than it would be to USAID. Is that correct, Nye?
That is correct, Patricia. I'm sorry, I was responding to a question in the chat. Yes.
And building off of that, one of our colleagues was curious whether Paynes can use their funding to go to business schools, or they have to go to the many things underneath an IR umbrella.
Yeah, so yes, I'm sorry, no, okay, wait, let me answer this correctly. Can Payne fellows go to business schools? Yes, they can go to business school. Again, the XO, the executive officer backstop, is one that is closely related to on the Department of State side as a management officer. There's also needs for financial officers. There's a finance officer backstop in USAID, as well as contracting officers. So typically those skills are assessed and picked up in business programs. So yes, so long as it's a 2-year full-time traditional business program, again, the applicant, well, hopefully once they become a fellow, will apply separately to that program, and then we'll get, it will be approved by one of the USAID backstop coordinators who will verify, like, okay, this degree program here at this business school will be applicable for an executive officer, a finance officer, or a contracting officer. And then the fellow will have until the end of next year to essentially really decide which career backstop, because these are career tracks essentially for USAID, from those 3 that their graduate program was applicable to, that they're like to enter into. So you can say, well, I'm getting my MBA, you know what, actually I realized, you know, concentrating in finance, I think I might just want to just be an executive officer, general management, right? As opposed to niche as a finance officer and really dealing with overall budgets, et cetera. So I hope that answers your question, but yes, we do welcome that.
And that's actually a great pivot point, Nye. Do students need to declare their desired cone or track or backstop, depending on the program, when they apply? Can they declare that later on? How certain do the students have to be when they turn in their application?
So for Payne, and this is great question. And that for Payne, it's a little bit more unique. So because of the niche needs of USAID, again, the development work, right? USAID requires the backstop coordinators to verify and confirm the graduate programs on behalf of the fellowship. So they'll verify, okay, this is if you're looking at this program, it's applicable to these pieces here, which means that you would be looking at either one or these 3 career tracks, et cetera. They won't make there's no definite decision that has to be declared right then and there, and especially if you have a multiple career track piece, where there's cases where we have fellows who can go to 2 career tracks, but come their second year of graduate school would be where they would have to confirm which of the 2, again, that they're really going to essentially going to make their career path into USAID once they're onboarded. I'll pause there.
So for State Department, they do not have to know beforehand. So usually they have until the October of the year before they actually go into the Foreign Service. So they have a year and a half, so that they're often able to work in their career track, in different career tracks beforehand. They get mentors because they tell us which ones they think they're interested in, and we'll work with them to get mentors and have speakers. But in the end, they can pick any career track they want. You don't have to have special training to be an economic officer or a management officer, because the State Department will do the training. So again, they have time to speak. I would say most people, we do collect the information just because we're always interested in what people think. And of course, as you can probably imagine, most people are like, I want to be a political officer, I want to be a public diplomacy officer, and that's perfectly fine. If everybody wants to do that, that's great. But we will try to expose them to some of the other career tracks too.
There's good work in all spaces.
Oh, absolutely.
Now, I know you answered this in the chat, but just for everyone's sake, could you give just a couple examples of some recent overseas internships that Payne Fellows have done?
Yeah, absolutely. This summer, actually, our fellows are they're all gearing to return this week. We have my calendar's going off with all of these flight returns. But so the Payne summer experience consists of, again, it's 10 weeks overseas at a USAID mission specifically. So they may or may not be at a large embassy with, state embassy, et cetera, or they may actually be at a specific USAID mission site there. During that time, usually their backstops are confirmed, because this is going into their second year. So their backstops are already confirmed in regards to their choices, or essentially their degree. Like if it's an environmental program, they're usually going in to be an environmental officer. So they only have that one career track. So they'll be placed overseas directly by USAID at the mission. They'll spend their time working on various projects. It can be just one, depending upon where they're going and depending upon, again, that backstop. So for instance, if they're doing like an environment, right? Let's stay on trend. If they're becoming an environment officer, they may be working on water security, or water projects, et cetera, or a host of other type of situations and research and working on programs, et cetera, in their host country at the mission there. During that time, they're also doing site visits to various communities, learning about how USAID partners and engages with foreign nationals, and how aid is essentially delivered through these programs from USAID to the communities of need, et cetera, there. Afterwards, during that entire time, they're also writing reports for our fellowship program as well, because we like to know about the substantive work that they're doing and their experiences. But they're also, in some cases of some of our fellows returning, they've written reports and cables and things for their supervisors. They've spoken in front of villages and communities, talking on issues regarding public health. So it's a plethora of different types of experiences there, but it will all be substantive in relation to their career backstop again. So by that time, again, as the overseas for Payne is in between the first and second year graduate school, they'll have an inkling, or they'll either have confirmed if they had an option of a multiple backstop choices depending upon their graduate program, and they will be pretty much picking up work in that substantive area overseas there for that 10-week experience. And then we'll bring them home. Again, round trip transportation is covered by the program, as well as housing, which is covered by the USAID mission. And then they receive a personal living stipend during that time as well. So they can really just focus on working and gaining those, getting that experience. And that's full-time work as well that they're doing over there. So 40 hours a week during that.
That's great. Thank you. One person was wondering whether students can defer their Pickering and Rangel and Payne start dates for things like Fulbright. Is that a possibility, Patricia?
Yes, so we have 3 reasons that we allow deferral. One of them is Fulbright. We do not do it for Boren, we do not do it for CLS, but we do it for Fulbright. And that's Fulbright ETAs or Fulbright research. We won't do it for one of the graduate program Fulbrights, but the other ones we will defer for. We'll also defer if, let's say, they have military service, something like that. And then the last one is if they have a personal issue. So if someone becomes very ill, if there's something that that personally they cannot go forward at that moment, something outside of their control, again, we have the ability to defer up to a year. In addition, for the first summer, because Rangel has a congressional internship the first summer, and sometimes there are other things that happen for that first summer. So maybe they have a contract, they're a teacher, right? And they have a contract through the end of June. So in that case, they couldn't do their congressional internship. So there's a few others just for the congressional internship. But yes, so Fulbright, they can, when they're writing their Fulbright applications, they can write the Rangel applications and Pickering applications too. And if they get it, it's usually, March or April when they tell us, and it's perfectly fine. They often will, actually for Rangel, they often will come and spend the summer with us, that first summer with us, which is great because very often it's late August or early September before they're going out. But if it's a different schedule, we work with that too.
Anything Payne specific? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that's a ditto for Payne, everyone. So those are the 3 situations where we would allow for deferment up to a year as well. Mainly, again, the Fulbright ETA or research, military, or again, extenuating circumstance in regards to personal situations there. So with the Fulbright for the Payne Fellowship, because of our selection process, again, we notify the end of January. And again, like Patricia said, the notifications for Fulbright typically come out like around that March, April, May period. We will need to be notified. Our ask is to be notified. So inform if you have applicants that you're considering advising that they notify our program that they've applied or intend on applying to Fulbright. Because we have a very short onboarding period between when they're notified and then in May when they come for orientation and then begin their 10-week congressional internship.
Thank you. One last quick question on deferrals. Do you select alternates to fill those spaces? And if so, are some finalists told they're alternates in the case of a deferral?
Yes, though alternates, we don't go to alternates for deferral because we're keeping their spot for them. So we wouldn't go to a deferral because you couldn't put them on for the next year because they didn't apply for the next year. So no, but we do have alternates, and that does come in. We do go to alternates pretty much every year, at least one. And that comes down to someone who, for some reason, realizes after they get it that they, for a family reason or some reason they can't go through it. It could also have to do with one of the clearances, because sometimes, some clearances can be more difficult than other clearances depending on, your recent activities. So some people will choose to withdraw, wait a year, come back the next year and do it again when they feel a little bit more confident about getting a clearance. So there are reasons. Usually it's right away, but sometimes it might be a year into it when somebody decides they can't go forward. So we do. So for our top alternates, we actually go ahead and get them security clearances, which are actually worth quite a bit to them, even if they don't come in. So yes, we do have alternates, and we do go to alternates sometimes. And for our top alternates, they do get security clearances. Nye?
Yes, on the Payne side, it's very, very similar. We do have alternates, top alternates, excuse me, after our selections as well, in the event that again, an awarded fellow changes their mind, or again, extenuating circumstances, etc., may come up. What else can I say about that?
Yeah, let's just maybe briefly say, so the most common thing has to do with clearances. They have to get medical security and suitability clearances. Medical clearances is usually not a problem. They just have to be healthy enough to serve in posts around the world. Security and suitability can be a little bit tougher sometimes. The most common reason has to do with recent use of illegal drugs. So even if in your state it's okay, it's still federal crime. That hasn't changed, and so that sometimes can be an issue. And we ask people, we tell students they can be very honest with us about it if they need to talk it through. Another thing is recently has been travel to Cuba. If they did it on an educational program and all the paperwork was done correctly, no problem. But if they were in the Caribbean and they decided to take a tourist trip to Cuba, that still was illegal too. So those are two kind of common things that happen. But by far the most clear common one is recent use of illegal drugs. If they don't pass clearance, do they need to repay tuition? Yes. So we don't ever want to put somebody in that. So that's why we ask you to pick early, so there's time for their security clearances. We also give them the option. So let's say, again, they're picked in December. They go through their first summer, right? But let's say, most of them by now have their security clearance, it's not a problem. But if they still don't, and there's something they're nervous about, they can choose to defer at that point, so they don't have to go into graduate school. So they don't have to start taking on debt if they're still uncertain. Or they can go into graduate school but not take the money. That's not usually an option for most people, but so we try everything we can, and generally repayment is if it's something that they had control over. If for some reason they find some kind of medical condition that they didn't know about, we're not going to charge. The State Department will not charge them for that. But if it's, again, recent use of drugs, which is something that we tell them often about, then that's something they might be charged back with. If it's a family issue, you didn't know that your, family member was an intelligence officer in Russia or something, that, again, it's not your fault. So, but it is possible that people will have a repayment obligation, but we do everything we can along the way to keep them advised of that ability and try to give them a couple of lanes where they can kind of veer off if need be.
Thanks to you both. We have about 15 minutes left, and I see some great questions in the chat. So the one thing I wanted to pivot to was application advice. The first question I have for both of you is, what information do reviewers want and don't want to read in an applicant's essay? Patricia, why don't you go first? You've been reading essays a long time. The most
important thing that they want to read is, why do you want to be a foreign service officer for this program? You'd be surprised. Actually, you guys probably wouldn't be surprised. You're the one group that would not be surprised when I say this. People sometimes don't even answer the question. They won't even mention the foreign service. They have their their great essay that talks about their life, and it's really inspiring, but it really has nothing to do with foreign service, right? So yes, we want to know something about them, but we really want to know why the foreign service of the State Department, which is a different question than why the foreign service of USAID, right? It's a different type of work. And so if they can really focus on, maybe there's public service, maybe there's an interest in living and working abroad, maybe there's an interest just in the career itself, which is really dynamic. I mean, our jobs change all the time. We're constantly learning. Maybe there's something interesting, about it. So we would like to know that. Second thing is, again, what they bring. And there's not one thing we're looking at. Some people have language skills. Other people maybe come from a multicultural family. Other people have really strong public service. So you get to kind of pick what you've done. If you have done things that shown you overcome obstacles, it's not the story about how sad it was. It's what you learned from it, the kind of resourcefulness or resilience that comes from having to work twice as hard to get something. So those are the things that we look at. Things that we don't necessarily want to see: long quotations. You only get 600 words, so we don't really care what the dead guy thinks, but we are very interested in their what they have to say about themselves. So that to us is interesting. Other things, again, we want to be inspired, but it's not one of those things where you have to just really pull at our heartstrings. Sometimes people feel like it's got to be, no, I mean, we just want to, why do you want this and what do you bring? So that's probably this. And again, it should be a personal statement, something that only they can write. So I would say those three, if they can answer those three questions, it's a very good personal statement. Now, would you like to add something?
Yeah, just one more thing. Really just be and advising them to be intentional, again, about the fellowships that they're respectively applying for. These are all three, actually four, wonderful opportunities, and you may come across an applicant that has an interest that may be applicable across the board, right? And considering our dates, et cetera, have them be intentional. I cannot stress that enough. The selection panels are all different across the board. There's no and our staff is not involved in the actual content review of these essays, et cetera. That is on the selection panel who makes these makes those decisions there. So while we will review for eligibility to make sure that you have the 3.2, et cetera, but being intentional is paramount in those statements, both the financial need statement. Again, as Patricia said, pulling at the whole heartstrings, no woe is me. Be concise, be clear, be intentional. Again, and especially if you're applying for if they have an interest across the board, when they get to FAS, which is very different, USDA FAS, and Payne Fellowship, USAID programs, again, being clear about the interest in development for USAID, their passions there, et cetera, and their preparedness for graduate school, I will say. Yeah, only thing I can add regarding that.
I love the advice to not quote old dead guys.
Yes.
I have lots of other things I wanted to draw out from you, but in the interest of time, as a similar question, what is helpful for readers to see in the letters of recommendation? And should they address suitability both for graduate school and the job afterwards, the fellowship? What is good advice about letters of rec, please?
Yeah, we have one, applicants can pull up, even though they never see their letters of recommendation. Each of our websites, you can see exactly what we're asking your recommenders. Oh, sorry about that. Hang on just a second. I'm going to take this slide while I close the door.
Yes. Yeah. So for the letters of recommendation, again, being intentional, right? Making sure that the recommenders are individuals that can actually speak to the students' the applicants' accomplishments, and again, their preparedness for graduate school, because these, at the end of the day, are still graduate fellowship programs, and there is the academic component, as our fellows must maintain a 3.2 GPA through graduate school still. So again, you want to make sure that they can speak to the candidate who they are. It's not just a title grab in regards to, oh, I have the dean of the School of Business writing this letter of recommendation and it's very generic. We want to know about any research. We really want to speak to the candidate and the work and their substantive interests in the respective either international relations affairs, the USAID's Foreign Service, or in the case of FAS, USDA's. Patricia?
Yeah, I would say we are interested in the recommenders' assessment of their potential for success in graduate school and the Foreign Service. So we're kind of interested in both. And it may be that, the person is not an expert in any of these areas, and that's okay. But it's, they have the intellectual ability, they have the curiosity, something like that to be successful in the Foreign Service. They don't have to be an expert in it, but they should basically know enough to know that, wow, it'd be great if somebody is, flexible and intelligent. And so we'd like to see that in a letter of recommendation.
For the essays in particular, but for all of the application materials, do you all yet have a policy on the use of ChatGPT or other AI generative tools?
We do not.
We'll edit that part out of the recording before the students see it. No, I'm kidding. Now, you briefly mentioned that the staff do an eligibility screen for those basic criteria, US citizenship, 3.2 GPA, et cetera. If a student discloses something in their application that may be a red flag for clearance, is that something that would get them screened out from competing for the fellowship at all? Or is that farther down the line?
Yeah, that would be further down the line because our staff would not, we wouldn't be at that level to discern, USAID and how they would work through that process. First things first, if it is something that they've disclosed in like an essay, et cetera, again, our staff for the eligibility review, we're not reviewing for grammatical errors in regards to that piece. That's again not our staff's job. We're reviewing to ensure that there is an essay that can be read, that is applicable and affixated to the application. We're assuring that the transcripts are valid transcripts, right? They're not, fake or anything like that, and that the cumulative GPA, be it across all that were provided or on the homeschool institution, is at that 3.2, and that they hit the other fields there. Now, once it gets sent up, and if that red flag piece is in an essay, for instance, right? It will have to get through the selection panel. And it will be at the selections panel discretion. Patricia, please correct me if I'm wrong, whether or not that applicant would even make it through as a finalist to be selected as, eventually be selected or selected as a fellow. If that applicant makes it through the selection panel, the application selection review phase, and they are selected as a finalist on the Payne Fellowship side, et cetera, and again, they are awarded the fellowship, they would be handed up to USAID because all of our fellows have to go, again, we start the security clearance process, et cetera, there. We'd flag it for our AOR at USAID, and then we would turn it over to the security clearance process, which again, it's not going to be a separate process. So like, let's say if the red flag was, again, there was an example of like a Russian intelligence officer as a family member, right? We can't say, oh, well, because their family member is neither, the selection panel might say, okay, well, they've mentioned this here, et cetera, but can we actually discern whether or not this person would be a conflict there? So we would still move them through and along our process. Now, if it's something more egregious, God forbid, but if it's something more egregious, et cetera, depending upon what that instance is, of course, we would flag it for our sponsoring agency in our internal processes. But again, in this case of the Russian intelligence officer being family, I'm sorry, I think I'm running over time. They would, again, be able to go through that process, and then we would allow the internal security clearance process to run its course, in which case they would ask for, again, all of information in regards to contacts, foreign nationals, et cetera, et cetera. And if the Department of State, because they do the security clearances, says that there's no foul play here. This person, their contact X, Y, and Z is clean, et cetera, then there's no issues. If the security clearance comes back and says, okay, hey, we have to deny this piece, there is a appeals process in which the fellow can appeal that decision and work through that process there. But once the final decision comes back, would be that determination on whether or not the fellow would be able to move forward or not. I'll stop there. Patricia, is there anything?
No, I think you got it. Basically, it's not our job, nor is it the security, the selection panel job to try to figure out whether or not they will get security clearances. Certainly, there could be something in there that would make them question their judgment, perhaps, but they would not try to figure out what their security, if they were going to have problems with a security clearance.
Thank you both. I want to wrap up, but I would invite both of you, if you don't mind, putting a recap in the chat of when the application deadlines are for the 4 fellowship programs, just to make sure everybody has those locked in. I also want to remind everyone that in the chat, we've shared the websites from all of these programs, and they do some fantastic student-facing events where they address some of the questions your students may have. So I encourage you to point your students there. We've also put in the chat some tips they can use as they prepare for their clearance and their letters of recommendation. So lots of great tools and resources to help keep the conversation going after this session. I also want to invite all of our advisors to join us. We have a number of great webinars coming up in September, some of which you have seen in my Friday emails, some of which you will see this week, including looking at some of those great programs that Patricia and I mentioned, the Gilman program, Foreign, the Public Policy and International Affairs program, the Congressional Bundestag program, that's an exchange program with Germany. Lots of great ways to keep building out your understanding of the opportunities for your students and help them be teed up when it comes time to apply and compete for programs like Pickering, Rangel, Payne, and I need to learn the new FAS acronym. So thank you all so much for being a part of this conversation. Thank you to our speakers, as always, for sharing your great wisdom. And we absolutely hope that your students will think about these fellowships as great gateways into public service through the graduate school lens. So have a great rest of your day, everyone, and take care.
Bye-bye.